Okay, God is so good through the people that lead us in worship and just allow us to kind of experience that together this morning. And we're going to continue to press into that through His Word. If you were here last week and I just showed it you on the screen, kind of our mission statement, you know, I shared who we were and why we exist and some of the questions that we try to answer are what I think the local church, what the church of God and the family of God is trying to answer for the human heart. That God has built the church together to answer some questions. And some of those questions are, why do we exist? Some of those questions are, what's my value? What's my worth? Other questions are like, am I good? Like, do I measure up? Am I good? As I compare myself around the world and as I think about what it means to be a good person on the planet, am I good? And what am I supposed to do? And we talked about last week that the church, that God has put the church into existence to answer those big questions. And there's a couple parts of that statement that I showed you that I want to look at this morning. There's the word broken, and I want to talk about that for a second. And then there's the word family. The word broken and the word family. So I want to show you, this is on our website, by the way, you can look at it, and it's a really big anchor for how we think about our lives and who we are. Okay, but I want you to see this statement about brokenness. It says, we confess brokenness. And as a church, we work to create a safe place where people can discover, process, and walk through their own brokenness. We refuse to be shocked or turned away from each other's hurt, pain, or baggage. That's a commitment we make. And if you're new this morning, test us. I promise nothing you share in your journey or story is going to be darker or more shameful than anybody you're sitting next to in this house. We are deeply aware of our brokenness. We're deeply aware of the way we have acted in ways that have hurt others. Right? We're not blind to that. We're aware of that. We're aware that we've done things that have hurt people in the world around us. We're aware that stuff has been done against us that we didn't have any control over, and yet we carry shame as we walk through life because someone offended us, hurt us, violated us, abused us, and we carry a sense of shame. And whether we're worth anything, if people could do that to us, do we have any sense of value at all? We understand that. And then we understand that just the planet we're on, the physical body that we have, is broken. And it has all kinds of things going on that cause pain in us. And so we're not blind to all that. We're highly aware of our smallness and our weakness on the planet. We're broken. We confess that. We're honest about it. We don't try to pretend like it's not there. But what we want to do is we want to process it. We want to work through it. And we make a commitment to each other that we won't be shocked or turned away. So you can say it. You can come out and you can say, hey, this is what I'm going through right now. This is what I've been looking at. This is what I've been contemplating. This is what I've been fantasizing about. This is the journey. This is the path I'm starting to walk down. And I don't know if that's what God has for me. And you can share that, and we're not going to flinch. And don't be surprised you hang out with Long and us, and we might share that with you. Your own pastor might share that with you. You might be surprised of the things that are going on in our own hearts. So we won't be shocked or turned away. But there's a way of doing this. How do we confess brokenness? How do we process that and work into all the things that God has for us? And so we have the second word, and it's called family. And I want you to see this statement that we have on our website. It says we cultivate family. That God has always been about the work of gathering a diverse group of people, every nation, tribe, and tongue, and socioeconomic background, rich and poor, every background possible, and gathered a group of people to show His glory. That's a big word for His beauty and His bigness. Show His glory to, and His love to, and His glory through. That's what God is doing. He's gathering people together and He's saying, here I am. And all my majesty and all my bigness. And I want you to know you're deeply loved. Show His glory and love through, to, and through. And we live this out by intentionally loving our neighbors, especially those most unlike us. walking, eating, there we go again, hallelujah, celebrating, and suffering together in ways that facilitate the Holy Spirit's transforming work in our lives. And that's a big thing, because here's the deal. You're broken, and I'm broken, but God is transforming our lives. In other words, we're not here to high-five each other and be like, Lewis, you're screwed up. Dude, so am I. High five, man. Woo! Good thing to know. You're screwed up and I'm screwed up. Man, let's just live up as screwed up people, man. This is a good deal. No stress here. Know that the God is working through a family to transform us, to change us bit by bit, step by step, slowly, right? And he does that through a family. And so the big question, I think it's pretty easy. How do we eat together? Man, we eat. We're pretty good at that. In fact, these are the things that no matter where you are, whether you've ever been in a church in your life, you get when people get together, that you have fun together, you eat together, you celebrate together, and if you really love each other, you'll suffer together. Now, you have to really love each other for that part. A lot of good friends have walked out of my life when suffering really happened. A lot of people I thought I was really close to were nowhere around, had nothing to say when suffering started going on. But this is how the world looks at it. They'll go, hey, we eat, we celebrate. If I really love you, maybe I'll suffer with you. But what we don't expect is that as we do life together that we're going to change. But that's the beauty of the way God's putting the family together. That it's the way that God works to transform us. Yes, in our brokenness, but to transform our lives. He does it as we cultivate family. So my question is, how do we walk it out? We know how to eat. We know how to celebrate. We know how to suffer, I think. How do we walk together? What does it mean to walk together? You know, some of you guys know, some of you guys, we've already hung out, we've had some dinner, and you know some of my summer experiences. But I climbed a mountain in Colorado a few weeks ago, okay? You can see, you can't really see because of the light. We're going to turn that light off. Maybe you can see that eventually. But I summited 14,336 feet. It's the fourth highest mountain in Colorado. So it means there's only 3 other mountains that were taller than where I was standing at that moment, okay? That's pretty cool. Now, before that moment, something traumatic happened to me. That helps a little bit. You can turn it back on. No big deal, Ray. Turn it back on. Yeah, it don't help. It don't help. That picture, I look fairly happy, though you can't really see my face. I look somewhat happy in that picture. Before that picture, about an hour before that picture, so I was hiking this mountain, and I was with an old friend of mine. And I'm going to try not to make this guy look too bad, but he's going to look kind of bad by the end of this story. Sorry, Garrett, if you watch this video, I love you. But something bad happened about an hour before I made it to the top. And what happened was the guy that I was climbing with, I was struggling to keep up with him, okay? I know it looks like I could keep up with anybody, and I'm just in awesome shape, but I was really struggling. I'm kidding. I'm joking. We talked about my athletic ability last week, okay? I was struggling to keep up with him. He lives in Colorado. He breathes that air. He was he was just shooting up the mountain, and he hung with me for about 4 hours, but he's always like 100 feet ahead of me and kind of like, hey, man, come on, and I'd catch up to him, and he'd wait for a second, then he'd move on, and so about an hour from the summit, he just turned on, and he was like, I got to make it to the summit, and he was like, peace, dude. He was the only person I was climbing with, okay, at this point. And I don't know if you've ever climbed a big mountain, but breathing, just normal breathing, is a challenge, okay? And everything else hurts, all right? I'm 37 years old. Everything hurts at this point. And so, you're just trying to walk to the top. He disappears. 10 minutes after he disappears, we bump into what is called a boulder garden. Anyone know what a boulder garden is? Yeah, okay. They're massive, huge boulders that are stacked on top of each other, and the trail disappears, okay? So 10 minutes, we're walking together. He disappears. 10 minutes later, the trail's gone. And it's you go up. It's not that confusing. You got to go up. But how you go up is you're not quite sure, okay? And so I was like, oh, well, here we go. I'm by myself. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever been in a moment of crisis and you're by yourself, I don't know you, but I get angry. I started getting really angry. Sorry, Garrett. But I started like saying stuff out loud. No one was around, just me in the mountain, And I was pretty upset. And then I got about, 30 feet up the boulder garden. And I got really upset because the boulders don't stand still. They move on you, okay? So at one point, I'm about halfway up, and I don't even know if I'm going the right direction. I'm standing on one, and the boulder drops. And I'm hanging on to the one top in front, and I'm hanging on. I'm like, good thing I do pull-ups once in a while. And my arms are shaking, and I'm just like, so mad at you. And I was so, and I don't know about you, but I felt really like alone. When you've got to solve like a problem and you're like in crisis and you're by yourself, that's a very, very lonely feeling. When I got to the top of that boulder garden and I got up to the summit, it wasn't the best experience of my life, to be honest with you, because I was alone. And I walked down, it took me 5 hours to walk down. Okay, I had to come back down the boulder garden, and I had to navigate all that by myself. And it was a really, and I'm not making this, it's not for fun. It was a really profound sense of loneliness. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, it was a really profound sense of being by myself on the mountain, nobody around. It was vast, I could see, and I was in pain. My knee hurt, my ankle hurt. And I was bleeding badly because I'd had to scale over the rock. And so you can look at my ankles and stuff. They're still scarred up from the climb. And it's just a deep, profound sense of being alone. And I don't know if you've ever felt that way. I know you have. I know some of your stories, and I know that some of you have. That's a really painful feeling. Just feeling profoundly alone. And the question is like, what does it look like to walk together? I was with a buddy, I was with a good guy, but we were walking together and then we weren't. And when we weren't, that was like the worst part of the journey. The boulder garden would not have been fun, but it would have been a lot better if I'd been with somebody who'd been like, hey man, this is how you do it. It'd been a lot more fun if on the way back down, when I'm sliding down my butt because I can't make the turn because it's so steep and I'm scraping up my leg, if there'd been someone in there that'd been like, hey man, this is how you grab it. This is how you do it. Oh, hey man, it's okay if you don't go fast. I'm walking with you. That would have made all that better, honestly. It's 10 times worse when you have to do it alone. So what does it look like to walk together? And I think that the Bible has something really cool to say, because here's the deal. This profound sense of walking alone, this is a common experience for most people that we know. In fact, studies will show, it says that 50% of people say that they are desperately lonely in America. It's such an epidemic that now, like the State Department and the health departments try to figure out how do we come up and deal with ways to help people feel less alone. Right? But it's a deep, profound thing that many people experience. And we don't really seem to have a good answer of answering the question, how do we walk together? Because here's the deal. Our drive, our natural drive to grab other people who have common interests. Okay, people who like the same stuff I like. All right, that'll help me not feel alone. All right, how people who don't have any drama, maybe that'll help me feel less alone. How about, people in the same generation of me? Maybe if I can find a group of people that we're all the same age, we all like the same food, maybe that'll help me feel less alone. Maybe people who will go watch all the Avenger movies with me, maybe that'll help me feel less alone. And the problem is most of us have grabbed onto stuff like that and found that it can't bear the weight of our heart's desire for actual intimacy. It just can't bear the weight. No matter what we try to do to grab onto common interests and people who like the same stuff and have the same cultural background and laugh at the same things we laugh, we find that it still can't seem to bear the weight of our heart's desire for intimacy. There has to be something more in how we walk together. And I want to say that the Bible has a big word. It's not a word we like to talk about often, but I think it's at the foundation of what it looks like to walk together in the way that God has intended us to walk together. And it's the word commitment. That's a dirty word, but it's the word commitment. And I think there are two very specific kind of commitments that would enable us to actually walk together through life, through the best parts of life and the worst parts of life, in ways that would transform our character to be more and more like Jesus. And here's the first commitment. The first commitment is it's a commitment to one another. It's a commitment to one another to say, good day, bad day, long day, slow day, how slow you walk, how fast you walk, how annoying your laugh is, whether you get on my nerves. No matter what, I'm committed to you. Committed to you. It takes a fierce mental and emotional commitment to one another, and two, a commitment to forward motion. In other words, a commitment to say, we're going somewhere. You ever been with a group of people who aren't going anywhere? It's fun for like a minute, and then you're like, I'm, turning 25 or 37, and I've got, I got to do some stuff in my life. Like, you guys keep having fun. Friday nights, great. You guys go do your thing. I got some stuff to do. I got to move on. And if we don't have a commitment to each other that says, hey, where you go, I will go, and a commitment to forward motion, right, we're not going to experience some of the transforming work that God wants to do in our lives as we cultivate family. And I want to show you this from the Bible. I've done a lot of talking, and I haven't shown you God's word yet. I want to show you God's word in Ephesians chapter 4. Check this out, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1. This is Paul. And Paul, in the first 3 chapters, talks about what it looks like for God to make you his son or his daughter. It says he adopts us. It's the image of we're orphans, and he sees us, and he says, I want you. You're my son. You're my daughter. I want to gather you into my family. That's chapter 1. He adopts us into his family. Chapter 2, it shows us how deep our brokenness can go. How deep our brokenness can go, and yet, by God's grace and his mercy, those of us, we were dead in our rebellion against God, but God made us alive. We didn't do anything, but God reached in and he woke us up and he made us alive. In chapter 4, he gets to this thing called the church, this group of people that he's gathered together. And look at what he says in chapter 4, verse 1. He says, I therefore am a prisoner for the Lord. And he doesn't mean that metaphorically. He's in jail, okay? So, and I don't know about you, but jail's not a super sociable place, okay? So it's not like Paul's got his homies together and he's having like a great time in jail, eating potluck every day, okay? No, like he's lonely. He is alone in jail. And he says, I am a prisoner for the Lord. I urge you, church that's in Ephesus, this church that's in a local place, I urge you to what? To walk, there's our word, to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called. With what? What's the manner? That's the way you walk, right? How do you walk together? With humility, with gentleness, with patience. Those are 3 huge words that make the next phrase possible. You can't do the next thing he's about to say, in other words, this commitment to one another, if you do not commit to yourself to be humble, gentle, and patient. They are absolutely required for the kind of commitment he's about to ask us to have for one another. And here's what he says. Bearing with one another in love. Bearing, carrying, leaning on one another in love. You can't do it. You can't do it if you hang on to your pride. What you deserve, what your rights are, what you demand, right? You can't do it if you're going to be a bully. You can't. You can't do it if you're going to be impatient. Hey, I have ruined so many relationships in my life just because I'm impatient. Because they didn't snap to it when I wanted to, when they didn't come when I asked them to come, when they didn't hang out with me when I was ready to hang out. You know anybody like this? Hey, I want to go out on Friday night. I can't do this Friday night. That's it. I guess you're not one of my friends. Humility, gentleness, and patience, because the kind of commitment to one another requires that we bear with one another, that we lean on one another in love. This is how we walk together. It's a commitment to one another. A commitment that says I'm going to let down my pride. A commitment that says I'm going to drop my personality sometimes. A commitment that says I'm going to be patient even though I want things done my way in my time. But I'm committed to you. And then look what he says next. There is one body. That's a way he's talking about the family of God, the church. There is one body and one spirit, the Spirit of God. Just as you were called to one hope that belongs to your call. One Lord. His name is Jesus. One faith. One baptism. One God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But grace was given to each of us according to the measure of God's gift. Okay? So he's saying, you need to have this radical zeal and commitment to one another, where you're going to bear with one another in love, and the kind of bear with one another in love is going to translate in the word he used is oneness, a one. Now that's a radical thing, because here's the deal. I live in America, and I'm my own person, we like to say. I got my own way of doing things. I got my own rhythm. I'm autonomous. I'm an individual. And what he's saying is that mentality disintegrates oneness. It disintegrates the actual intimacy that our hearts long for. Our radical individualism, our radical commitment to ourselves and how we're wired and what we like and what's good for us, it disintegrates any kind of real intimacy that we could have with somebody else. And see, we'll run with people for as long as they'll run with us. But the moment they want to walk faster, get to the summit faster, don't want to wait, don't want to put up with things that are annoying, like things that are different than you, and all of a sudden, hey, we're out. And then we wonder why we don't have the kind of intimacy that God's asked us and called us to have with each other. And so he says, I want you to bear with one another. And listen, there's one family, he's saying. And you get to that oneness, leaning into that unity by bearing with one another in love. Check out what it says when you get down to verse 13. We do this, we bear with one another like this, until we all attain to the unity of the faith. Till we all obtain to the unity of the faith. So this walking together, teaching one another, training one another, loving one another, being humble with one another, being patient with one another. We do it till we, what? Till we all obtain to the unity of the faith and of the, what? The knowledge of the Son of God, Jesus, to full maturity, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. Let me tell you what he's trying to say. He's saying, if this thing's going to work, you need to have a radical commitment to one another. One that demands that you're humble, gentle, and patient. A radical commitment to bear with one another in love. And then what's your forward motion toward? What's the forward motion that the family of God is leaning toward? It's leaning to a fuller view and relationship with Jesus. That's what he says, to the full knowledge. And it's not knowledge like book knowledge. It's not knowledge like I memorized Ephesians. It's not knowledge like I went to seminary. It's the knowledge of relationship. He's saying you bear with one another, fiercely committed to one another with the commitment to forward motion. What's the forward motion toward? It's toward a deeper relationship with Jesus. A deeper relationship with who he is, and a deeper growing into his character. Who he is and his character. And it says to the full measure of who Christ is. The full measure of the stature. Another way to say it is the full measure of the standard of who Jesus is, some translations say. That's the forward motion. So it's two commitments if we're going to have real family. One is a fierce commitment to one another that requires us to let go of our lives a little bit. And then a commitment to forward motion. What's the forward motion? A fuller, deeper relationship with Christ. So here's what happens when the family of God is cultivated. The family of God gets together and goes, hey, Tiffin, I don't care that are you in your 50s, Tiffin? Yeah, he's a young 50-year-old, okay? I mentioned Tiffin because Tiffin's one of my favorite people to have lunch with. And I mean that, has been since he's been here. We've had deep, long conversations, and he's old. I don't mean that, I'm just kidding. We're not in the same generation. We share virtually no common experience. You have 8 kids total? 9. 9 kids, okay? 9 kids, how many grandkids? 9 kids, 4 grandkids. What are you, 6'2"? 6'2"? And have you noticed how much hair he has? I mean, look at this guy. If you took some of the gray out, you wouldn't even, full head of hair, 6'2", 9 kids, 4 grandkids. I mean, could anybody be different? More different than me? It's hard to find. But let me tell you, and I was thinking about this, Tiff, and I should have told you this before I was in, but I was thinking about this. We're friends, and we've gone through some crap together. That's the easiest way to talk about it. But we're friends because there's a commitment to being together, a commitment to walking together. And there's an ability in that commitment to say, here it is. Here's the junk. And a commitment in the middle of that junk to say, hey, this is exactly what I think. There's a fierce commitment to one another. And it's not just like, hey, we're high-fiving and we're friends. And there's also a fierce commitment to forward motion. Sometimes that forward motion is really slow, but there's still a commitment to it. In fact, all the deep relationships in my life have a commitment to forward motion, which means that when we're talking and we're leaning into each other's life and we see things that are tangled up and things that are hurting and things that are broken and things that are stuck, when you really walk with someone, you're committed to forward motion. Committed to saying, hey, I know this is where we are. What would that look like to take that next step? What would it look like to just shift just a little bit in the direction we're trying to move in? What would it look like just to make the next choice that would move us in the direction of knowing Jesus more and letting go of the brokenness that I walk in? What would that look like? It's a commitment to one another and a fierce commitment to forward motion till we all, listen, all, it's not for 1 or 2 people. We do this until we all obtain to the full knowledge of the Son of God. So this process of being committed to one another and pushing one another forward doesn't stop until we see Jesus fully, clearly, till we have our arms around him, till we've grown up into the full measure and the character of who Jesus is. And that's what we're doing to cultivate family. I want you to check out some of the things that come along as we do that. There's some barriers to that. There are 2 main barriers to what I'm talking about. 2 main barriers to this commitment to one another and this commitment to forward motion, namely to know Jesus in a deeper way. And here are the barriers. 1 is a hard heart. A hard heart toward God, and that can be cultivated through disappointment. That's where my battle is. Anywhere where I'm deeply disappointed with God is translated into a hard-heartedness with God. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like something just hasn't gone the way it should. Things have not worked out the way they should. Life hasn't gone the way it's supposed to. And what happens is, if you believe in God at all, at the end of the day, you go, God, it's your fault. And it cultivates a hard heart. Maybe your marriage isn't what you want. Maybe stuff has happened with your kids that you don't want. Maybe your career hasn't turned out the way you want. Something hasn't gone the way it should, and what happens is a bitterness grows in our heart and we get hard-hearted. Or maybe you have a hard heart with people. Maybe your experience and your journey is such where people have wounded you again and again and again and betrayed you again and again and again, or just haven't come through when they were supposed to. And what happens is a hard heart starts to be cultivated inside of us. And what that does is it's a wall we begin to put up. You wonder why when you pray God doesn't speak? Well, when your heart is hard, when there's a wall up, right? We're saying, God, talk to me, but I don't want to hear you. You're not going to let me down again. Oh, why don't people ever accept me? How come people don't ever love me? How come they never come through for me? But then we're always putting up walls with people. We're always pushing people away. And it all comes out of a hard heart. The second thing I think the text is going to show us is radical self-centeredness. Or another way to say it is an elevated sense of my own autonomy. A radical self-centeredness or an elevated sense of my own autonomy. I want you to look what happens here. Just as he talks about how this church builds itself up in love, as it grows into Jesus. Look at verse 17. It says, now I say and testify in the Lord that I must no longer walk as the Gentiles do, the folks that don't know God. And the futilities of their mind, they are darkened in their understanding. They're alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them. What due to their hardness of heart. They've become callous and have given themselves over to sensuality, and they're greedy to practice every kind of impurity. It's hardness of heart and self-centeredness. But that's not the way you learned Christ. Assuming that you've heard about him and were taught in him as the truth is in Jesus, to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful, and we could say selfish desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, what? It's created after the likeness of God, namely Jesus, in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore, verse 25, put away lies and falsehood, and let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor. Why? For we are members of one another. What he just said is there's this cultivating of love, this leaning on one another, bearing one another in love, growing into love, so that we all come to know Jesus. And then what's he say is the barriers to that? A hardness of heart and a radical selfishness, a greedy to any kind of practice and deceitful desires. All that is just a fancy way of saying, I'm going to do what I want and I don't care what happens to you. I'm going to do what's right for me and I don't care where the chips fall for the rest of you. Because what's most important is what works for me. And Paul comes along and says, but you're members of one another. In other words, if you're part of this gathering, everything you do affects the people you're a member with. Every choice you make, every moment you decide that you're not going to drop your pride in that moment. Every moment you decide that, hey, you know what, if they can't handle my personality, that's on them. Every time you step out and say, I'm not going to bear in love. I don't have to give in. I don't have to bear with the weaker person. I'm just going to do what feels right to me. Every time you do that, you're affecting the people that you're members with. We're members. We're linked up together as we push ourselves forward to know Christ more. It's a powerful, powerful idea. So look at what he says. Look at verse 29. It says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth. What's corrupting talk? Corrupting talk is talk that disintegrates relationships. Corruption. You ever had something that's corrupt, a file that's corrupt? Right? It just disintegrates so that it comes apart. Let no disintegrating, corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as good as for building up as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. And don't grieve the Holy Spirit, by whom you are sealed for the day of redemption. And let all bitterness, that's the root of hard-heartedness, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. And be what? And be kind to one another, and what? And tender-hearted. Isn't that amazing? Be kind to one another and tenderhearted. And then what? Assuming that I'm screwed up and you're screwed up and we spend any amount of real time together, I will hurt you and you're going to hurt me. If we have any kind of real relationship, I will need to ask you to forgive me and vice versa.